Logan Hartwell sat across from his father-in-law at an upscale Japanese restaurant in San Diego's Gaslamp Quarter, holding a glass of Sapporo, completely still. Dwight Mercer leaned toward the translator and said something in Japanese he assumed his son-in-law would never understand. He was wrong. Logan understood every single word, and instead of reacting, he smiled, set down his glass, and quietly made a decision that would take 4 months to execute and about 30 seconds to deliver. Logan had spent 12 years as a senior international trade consultant, negotiating contracts across 11 countries, closing 8-figure deals, and working out of offices in Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. He spoke fluent Japanese. Dwight didn't know that. Neither did Logan's wife, Chloe. And that assumption would turn out to be the most expensive mistake either of them ever made. He'd met Chloe at a trade conference 3 years earlier. She was sharp, confident, and carried her father's name like armor. Logan fell for her genuinely and proposed at Balboa Park on a Saturday in October. He meant every word of it. What he didn't fully account for was how much Dwight viewed him not as a son, but as a threat. Logan was successful in the same space Dwight occupied, and better at it. To Dwight, that made him competition, something to be managed carefully until it could be eliminated. Logan filed that observation away and said nothing. 5 months into the marriage, Logan came home from 10 days in Osaka, and something felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just subtly off, the way a room feels when someone's been through it while you were away. Chloe was warmer than usual, attentive in a rehearsed way. He'd been in enough negotiations to recognize when someone was managing him, so he started paying attention. Over the next 6 weeks, the picture developed. Chloe added a pin to her phone when she'd never had one. She took calls in the guest bathroom, blaming bad reception in rooms where she'd never had trouble before. She checked her phone under the dinner table with the screen angled away. Most telling, she asked about his travel schedule with a casual precision that wasn't romantic. It was operational. She wanted to know when the coast was clear. Logan gave her his schedule. Then he quietly rearranged one trip. He left for Seattle on Thursday morning and came back Thursday night. The condo was empty. In the recycling bin, he found a takeout receipt from a restaurant in Little Italy. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, time-stamped 8:47 p.m. Chloe had told him she was having dinner at her father's house that evening. He put the receipt in his desk drawer, made himself a drink, and went to bed. He wasn't certain yet. He had a receipt, a changed password, and a feeling in his chest he'd learned to respect. That's not certainty. That's information. And information requires verification before it becomes anything you act on. His father used to say, "Patience isn't passive. Patience is active waiting." You're letting the picture develop. Logan let it develop. The call from Dwight came in April. He wanted Logan at a client dinner the following Friday. A Japanese buyer named Kenji Asakura was considering a major distribution partnership with Mercer Pacific, and Dwight wanted family present. In Dwight's mind, a successful son-in-law added credibility. Logan was a useful prop for the evening. He agreed to come, then spent 2 evenings researching Kenji's firm. They'd exited 2 prior U.S. partnerships after discovering financial misrepresentation. That detail sat in the back of Logan's mind, like a fact waiting to become relevant. The restaurant was Shoku, a private Japanese dining room in the Gaslamp Quarter. 6 people at the table: Logan, Chloe, Dwight, Kenji, his translator Riku, and Dwight's nephew Preston, a 28-year-old who talked too loudly after 2 drinks, and whom Logan had marked as irrelevant from the moment they met. Dinner began smoothly. Dwight handled questions about Mercer Pacific with practiced confidence. Logan ate, listened, and watched Kenji's face. He'd spent a decade reading rooms across cultural lines. When Preston spoke, he saw it instantly, the politely contained expression of a man who has permanently concluded that someone across the table is not serious. Kenji would never say it, but the conclusion had been reached, and Dwight couldn't see it because he was too focused on his own performance. Then, about 40 minutes in, Kenji leaned to Riku and said quietly in Japanese, assuming no one else could follow, that he needed to know what the son-in-law actually did. He'd been quiet all evening. Was he serious, or was he decoration? He said he wouldn't sign anything until he knew who he was actually dealing with. Logan raised his water glass and took a slow sip. Then Dwight made his mistake. Sensing the conversation slipping away, he leaned toward Riku and in a low but perfectly audible voice said in Japanese to keep Kenji focused on him, not the son-in-law. Logan was there for show. He didn't speak a word of Japanese and had nothing to do with their Pacific operations. All decisions went through Dwight. Logan set down his glass and spoke, directly to Kenji Asakura, in entirely natural, unhurried Japanese. He apologized for the interruption, introduced himself as a senior international trade consultant with 12 years of Pacific Rim experience, said he was familiar with the regulatory filing from Kenji's last US distribution exit, and offered to discuss a partnership structure that protected him from repeating that outcome, tonight or whenever Kenji preferred. The table went completely silent. Kenji looked at him with the expression of a man who has just realized the meeting went differently than expected, and that the difference was in his favor. He said Logan spoke quite well. Logan said he'd lived in Osaka for 2 years. Kenji smiled, not the professional smile of the dinner table, a real one. Dwight was staring. Chloe had gone perfectly still. For the rest of the meal, Kenji directed every substantive question through Logan. Riku translated less and less because Kenji no longer needed him to. When dinner ended on Fifth Avenue, Kenji shook Dwight's hand with the careful warmth of a man who hasn't yet made a decision. Then he turned to Logan, handed him his personal card, and asked in Japanese if he was available Thursday. Logan said he'd make himself available. The drive home was the quietest 14 minutes Logan had ever spent with another person. He had understood for 2 months what he hadn't said aloud to anyone. Chloe wasn't simply working at her father's firm. She was his forward position inside Logan's life, relaying information from their household, curating what Logan saw, while a different version of their marriage existed in conversations he wasn't part of. 3 weeks before the dinner, Logan had spoken with a colleague in business law named Victor and laid out everything he'd assembled. Victor said it was sufficient to begin a formal process and that Logan's financial position, documented carefully before the marriage, was clean. Logan told him he wasn't ready. Victor asked what he was waiting for. Logan said the dinner. He met Kenji at the Westgate Hotel on Thursday. They spoke almost entirely in Japanese. At one point, Kenji asked directly whether Dwight had been lying or just didn't know when he called Logan decoration. Logan said a little of both. Kenji asked if it created complications. Logan said it had, and that he was in the process of resolving them. He drove back to the office and called Victor. He said he was ready. He served Chloe the divorce papers on a Monday morning in late June. She was making coffee when he set the envelope on the counter, without announcement or speech. She stared at it and asked if this was because of the dinner. He said no, it had been building for a while, and for the first time, he told her everything: the receipt from Little Italy, the phone, the travel schedule questions, the 2 months of careful documentation. Victor. The way her father, in trying to make Logan invisible, had handed him something he couldn't have manufactured on his own. Chloe didn't deny most of it. What she said at the end was that he had no proof of anything improper. He said she was correct, and that he wasn't alleging anything improper. He was ending the marriage. Dwight called twice. Logan answered the second time. Dwight called it a family matter and wanted to sit down. Logan let him finish, then told him quietly that the dinner at Shoku wasn't what he'd expected, and neither was Logan. He said he hoped the Asakura partnership worked out and that he was no longer part of Dwight's world. Dwight went quiet, then said Kenji had called and wasn't moving forward with Mercer Pacific. He asked if Logan had said something to him. Logan said he'd had a business meeting and been honest about who he was. Whatever conclusions Kenji reached, he reached them on his own. Another silence. Then Dwight said something Logan hadn't expected. He said he'd underestimated him. Yes, Logan said, you did. He hung up. 6 weeks after the papers were filed, Kenji Asakura reached back out. He needed a consultant for his West Coast distribution structure, regulatory review, partnership vetting, the full scope. It was the largest single contract Logan had signed in 4 years. His accountant called with that tone he only uses when he's genuinely impressed. Logan moved out of Mission Hills and found an apartment in Little Italy, 7th floor, west-facing windows, a view of the bay that changes color 4 different ways between sunrise and sunset. People focus on the moment at the dinner table, the Japanese, the silence, the look on Dwight's face. And he understands why. But the dinner was just the visible surface of something built carefully underneath it for months. Patience isn't passive. Passive is waiting, because you don't know what to do. Patience is waiting, because you know exactly what's coming, and you're making sure everything is in position before it arrives. Dwight Mercer spent years building his firm room by room. Then he made the mistake men like him often make. He assumed the only people who build things that way are people like him. Somewhere in La Jolla, Dwight is still trying to figure out what happened at dinner. He's going to keep trying. Logan doesn't mind.